So good morning, everybody. My name is Reverend Dr. Ron Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to the Center for Spiritual Living Space Coast Sunday morning service. And I'd like to begin the way we always do when we're met in person. And I'd like to say, if you've never been to a Center for Spiritual Living before, we believe there's one God, many paths to that God, and we're here to love, honor, and support you, no matter what your divine path is. And the Center for Spiritual Living Space Coast is a safe haven for people of all beliefs and lifestyles. Whoever you are and wherever you find yourself on your journey of faith, you're welcome here. And now Reverend Jenna Watkins is going to begin by praying us in and doing a spiritual reading for us.
Okay, if you would like, just close your eyes. Take a nice deep breath in and let it go. And I declare right here, right now, that this is a spiritual moment, a sacred moment. For in this moment, we recognize here and now that each one of us is an individualized ray of the consciousness of love, the consciousness of goodness, of power, of freedom, of peace. And I know that this consciousness permeates this center, each and every member, each person listening to this tape, each person participating in this moment. This consciousness permeates our beingness, our soul, bringing to us that sense of it is okay, it is good. For I know that spirit always leads the way. And I know that this consciousness flows through the heart and mind and words of Reverend Dr. Ron Fox as he shares his message with us today. Each and every one of us will find some spark of wisdom that touches our hearts, that heals our minds, and frees our souls. I give thanks for his presence, his words, and I give thanks for the community, the Center for Spiritual Living Space Coast, for the community of love that we are. And so I release my word into the spiritual law of life, knowing it is manifest right here, right now, as I speak. And so it is.
So it is.
So my spiritual reading today is from Science of Mind 365, A Year of Daily Wisdom from Dr. Ernest Holmes. There is but one presence in the universe. Since it is in and through everything, it must be in and through you. This presence manifests itself in and through all forms, all people, all conditions. This presence is life itself. Its nature is love and givingness. Negation may be an experience and a fact. It can never be an ultimate truth. Life cannot operate against itself. Always the negative is overcome by the positive. Good cannot fail to overcome evil. Negative experiences may seem to exist for a brief moment, but truth exists forever. The consciousness of good must overcome the appearance of evil. Finally, good will obliterate everything unlike itself, even as the sun dissolves the mist. And now take these following words into your heart as I say them. I refuse to contemplate evil as a power. I know that it will flee from me. It dissolves and disappears in the light of love. I know that hate cannot exist where love is recognized. I turn the searchlight of truth upon every apparent evil in my experience. This light dissolves every image of evil. The manifestation of good is complete. Love makes the way clear before me. I am guided into an ever-widening experience of living. My every thought and act is an expression of the goodness that flows from life.
Thank you, Reverend Jenna. So my message topic today is believing in troubled times. And the genesis of the message, why I picked that title, For some of you probably know, for the last, I think, several months, every day I've been putting either an affirmation or words of wisdom on Facebook, and I've been putting it on the minister's listserv. And this week, one of the quotes, one of the words of wisdom that I selected was from Ernest Holmes. And the quote is, "No man has seen God at any time, nor has he seen goodness, truth, or beauty, but who can doubt their existence?" And I chose it because I thought, in this time that the U.S., that the world is going through, how true that is, and how for some it's really difficult to believe in truth or beauty and God. So that's really why I picked it. And it struck me that in this time we need to believe and to have faith and to look beyond appearances and to know that spirit is always expressing. Michael Beckwith says in difficult times, the question, why me, is not really relevant. For years I've said it's not, why me is not a spiritual question. But Michael does put forth a few questions that we can ask ourselves in these times. Three of them, for instance. The first one is, what quality am I called to cultivate? What quality am I called to cultivate? Is it patience? Is it compassion? Is it trust? Is it forgiveness? Second question, what skills am I called to develop? And the third question is, what would life have me do here? I really love that question. What would life have me do here? When we face difficult times, we can learn to be more generous, we can learn to be more forgiving, and we can learn to never give up on ourselves or on anybody else. Rachel Remen, I'm going to talk about her a couple of times today, and in one of her books, she talks about oysters, and we all know oysters live in the bottom of the ocean and they breathe. And in order to breathe, they open up their shell. And sometimes when they do, when an oyster does, some sand, a grain of sand will come in. And that grain of sand is really painful for the oyster, but the oyster uses that pain to create something of great value. We all know a pearl, and only a few can do it. Not every oyster can do it, but the few that can, it's their response to suffering. And Rachel says that there's something in all of us, in you and me and all of us, that can transform suffering into wisdom. And she says, the promised land can be many things to many people. For some of us, it might be perfect health. For others, it might be freedom from hunger or fear, or perhaps freedom from discrimination or injustice. But she said on the deepest level, perhaps it's the same for all of us. And she writes, it's the capacity to know and live by the innate goodness in us, to serve and belong to one another and life. Let me read that again. The capacity to know and live by the innate goodness in us, to serve and belong to one another and to life. And one of the things that's true in our life is very often, before we can go to a new beginning, chaos reigns. And in our personal life, we call it, in spiritual life, we call it a dark night of the soul. And it could be maybe someone close to us dies, or an illness of our own or somebody close to us, or a divorce or a job loss, or you fill in the blank. And on a societal level, we know what that is. It could be a virus. It could be social upheaval in the country. And what happens is chaos causes us discomfort, but it also clears a pathway for new ideas. And I think I said this last week, but in my prayer work lately, what I've been trying to acknowledge is right now, in the midst of everything that's going on in our world, in our country and in our world, that even though it doesn't always make sense to me, and the appearances aren't like this, that Spirit is right in the middle of it. God is right in the middle of everything that's going on. And so on some level, despite appearances, everything is unfolding in divine perfection. And Ernest Holmes says to us, we must learn to live by inspiration. That means we should let the spiritual depths of our being flow through our conversation and into our acts. So for so many of us, and I know we talk about this and people talk to me and we read about it, the response to what's going on is fear. So let me tell you another story that Rachel writes about. So she does counseling, and she was doing counseling with a woman when times got tough. Her first response was always to go into fear. So after months of counseling, Rachel said to her one day, from now on, you're not allowed to be afraid. And the woman got really angry at her and said, what do you mean? How could you be so cruel? And Rachel said, no, listen to me. From now on, when you go into fear, I want you to think of that as your first response. And then ask yourself, if I were not afraid, how would I respond to what is happening? And so this woman tried it. And what she found out, she realized after a while that staying safe was her mother's first response, and it was the most important thing in her mother's life. And she further realized that it wasn't the first thing in her life, and that her mother had led a very narrow and unhappy life. And she realized, she said, that if you carry somebody else's fear and you live by somebody else's values, that you may find you've lived their life. So I related that because I want you to think, if in these troubling times, if you go into fear, ask yourself why. Why right now am I going into fear? Why am I reacting like this? And what is behind this fear? Is there something behind this fear that I need to work on? And Rachel wrote, taking refuge doesn't mean hiding from life. It means finding a place of strength, the capacity to live the life we've been given with greater courage. So for me, that says, let's be aware of our thoughts, and let's be aware of what we put into our hearts every day. In the Bible, there's a place in the Bible where God says to somebody, I'm paraphrasing now, obviously, take off your shoes. Where you're standing is holy ground. And really that is saying to us is everywhere we are, Spirit is, that God is always where we are. And we can realize this lots of different ways, but we could certainly realize it in ways when we love like we didn't think we were capable of doing, or when we call on our best selves in the present. You know, and one of the ways that Ernest Holmes tells us that we can do this is by being for something rather than being against something. You know, for instance, we can be for equality and justice rather than being against racism. We can be for peace rather than being against war. I read that Mother Teresa was once asked by some people if she would join them in a march against the war. And she said, "No, I won't do that, but let me know when you have a march for peace and I'll be there." So Jenna and I were laughing one day, I think last week. I told her I was reading a book, a new book, and she said, "You know, I read a couple of books at the same time, and I do too. But one of the books I'm reading now is called The Gentle Art of Blessing." And in one of the chapters, he writes, I just want to read a small quote. He says, "As you walk, bless the city in which you live, its government and its teachers, its nurses and street sweepers, its children and bankers, its priests and prostitutes. The minute anyone expresses the least aggression or unkindness to you, respond with a blessing. Bless them totally, sincerely, joyfully. For such blessings are a shield that protects them from the ignorance of their misdeed and deflects the arrow that was aimed at you." And then he just quickly goes on to say, if you and I expressed hostility, fear, or lack of kindness towards someone, wouldn't we prefer that they responded to us with love, trust, and forgiveness rather than responding to us in kind? So I read a blog this week by a gentleman named Steve McSwain, and he was speaking about God and our connection to God. And he talked about how separation from God is a myth. And he said, you know, if you think God is up there and you're down here, you're never going to find God. And he said, so how can we find God? And he listed a bunch of ways. I just want to speak briefly about two of them. The first one is, he said, change, and this might not be true for any of us, but he said, change your thinking about yourself and about God. You aren't separate from God. Know that you're not separate from God, and know that you weren't born a sinner. You weren't born with original sin. And if you want an inner sense of God's nearness, why look outside for what's already inside you? And why look? Because you can't find what's never been lost. You can't find what's never been lost. That God within has never been lost to us. And the other thing that I just want to touch on is, he said, remember how God dwells in you and in everybody else. And I thought to myself when I read this, if we really did remember that, not just that God is in us, but how God is expressing in and through everybody else, how different our world would be. So I want to tell you a story, a fable about an Afghan king who governed his people in a very, very ruthless way. He had unjust taxes, and he just didn't take care of his people. And one day he goes hunting, and he's pretty far apart from the hunting group that he went with. And all of a sudden, a huge dust storm comes. And this dust storm lasts for a couple of days. And when it's all over, this king is totally disoriented. He's totally lost. His clothes were torn, and he's got dust all over. He's totally unrecognizable. And he happens to bump into a group of nomads, and he tells them, "I'm your king," and they just laugh at him. But they give him some food to continue on his journey. And so he walks to his palace, and he tells the guards, "Here I am," and they don't recognize him. They laugh at him. And he sees there's another king already ruling, who's ruling just like he did, ruthless and not caring for his people. And the guards chase him away. And so our king now has to learn how to live in poverty. But one of the things that happens is he lives, but with the help of others. One day, somebody gives him a drink. Another day, somebody gives him food. Another day, somebody gives him shelter, or somebody gives him a job so he can earn some money. And in fact, once he was walking by and sees a burning building, and he runs in and he saves a young child. And another day, he shares his food with somebody who seems hungrier than he is. And what happens to him slowly, he realizes that his subjects are people just like he is. And that in our life, people must care for each other. That life is so much more beautiful when we love one another and when we care for one another. And so he winds up getting his throne back and ruling in a much more different way. And the author said the great lesson in this story is, for all of us, I am not alone. I am not the only person. Others exist, and we need to care and love for one another. Abraham Maslow once wrote, "The great lessons from the true mystics is that the sacred is in the ordinary, that it is to be found in one's daily life, in one's neighbors, friends, and family, in one's backyard." So I was reading something on the internet this week from a group called explorefaith.org. And the article I read started out by saying how busy we are in life. You know, we can all, I'm sure, agree with this. How many phone calls we get, how often we're on the phone, or how many emails we get in a day, and the responsibilities that we have, taking care of families or children or grandchildren, or just the responsibilities we have in living life every day. And the point of the articles, what the article was, this is where we discover God. In our daily life, just as Maslow said, is where we discover God. And so they had a practice, and we're not going to have time to do it all, but if you feel comfortable, I'll go through the 3 or 4 steps of this practice with you, and I'll end with a short prayer. So they say, set aside 30 minutes every day and find a space. And they even say it could be in a park, on a bench. It doesn't have to be in a quiet spot. Just find a space where you could be and close your eyes and see what feelings there are in your body. I'll slow down in case somebody's following me on this. So see what feelings there are in your body. Feel your heartbeat. And then offer a prayer for the gift of life. And then they say, open your eyes and look around. Look at all the people that are around you. Feel the energy that's around you. Smell the odors that are around you. And then, once again, close your eyes. And this time, imagine that a silent shadow is moving in the midst of the noise and all the activity. This is the presence of Spirit. And Spirit touches us all. And now imagine that Spirit touches you. What does it feel like? What happens in your mind, in your body, in your heart, and in your soul? And then ask yourself, how do you feel about returning to the busyness of life? And then write down any feelings that you might have. And I'm going to close with this prayer that ends the article. Oh God, in moments of swirling energy and hushed stillness, let me know that you are as near to me as my next breath. When I would insist on sight rather than faith, let me suddenly sense a sweet scent that can only be your loving presence. When I stand wondering about the tattered edges of my life, let me be so still that I can feel your fingers weaving my soul together again. I ask this for the sake of your great love. Amen. Thank you for being here this morning. God bless you and have a great week.